Hey everyone, my name is Naguura, and today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the Crest system, about upgrading your gear, about embellished items, and in general, like what you should be doing. I think there's quite a lot of people that are confused about the Crest system, about the item track system, and about embellishments, about your spark items, crafted gear, and so on. So let me quickly try to give you some idea and maybe help you out on making decisions on what you want to use your crest on and what you want to use your sparks on. All right, so first of all, let's talk about sparks. So sparks are, of course, there for crafted items. And to be able to craft high item level items, you need to use a spark. Sparks are limited, and right now we only have 2. We'll get a third one next week. So you will be able to craft 3 crafted items pretty soon. But again, they're limited. So you do want to make sure that you don't just waste your sparks on items that you don't need or that you're going to replace very quickly. Now, one thing that is different in the War Within that we did not have in the previous expansion is that embellished items can actually be on non-spark items as well. So you do not need to use a spark for an embellishment. This is incredibly important to know because a lot of people think, oh, I need to craft a weapon with my spark because the embellishment that is best in slot for me is a weapon embellishment. So therefore I have to use a spark and weapon. But this is wrong. You can use an embellishment on non-spark items. They only go up to item level 590 maximum with Weathered Harbinger crests, enchanted Weathered Harbinger crests, if they're rank 5, right? So they go to 590, which it's not that high item level. I have one of them equipped right now here, for example. But it's still better to have the embellishment depending on how high item level the replacement item would be otherwise. So of course, you always have to make sure you're simming your character. If you don't know how to sim your character, I did make a video on this. The video is a bit old, but it still works, so definitely go and check it out. I might be making an updated video on how to use raid bots though, so keep an eye out for that one. But anyway, so make sure you sim your character to know which slot you want to use your embellishments on, especially if you want to use your embellishments on non-spark items, so on 590 items, then you might want to choose lower budget slots if you would otherwise have higher item level items in those slots. For example, I have a 606 wrist equipped right now. If I would downgrade this wrist to a 590 item to get a certain embellishment, then I have to sim my character to make sure if it's actually worth it. Because embellishments are not always that big of a damage gain, so it might not be worth it to downgrade your item level for it if you don't have a spark available. Now, what should you be using your sparks on? At the very start, so now that Season 1 came out and now that the raid is available, it might actually make sense to use your spark on a weapon. So even though the crafted items with Gilded Harbinger crest, so an enchanted Gilded Harbinger crest that we will be able to get once the raid fully releases, once Mythic Plus comes out, will get your spark item to the maximum item level. But the maximum item level of a crafted item with a gilded crest or enchanted crest is still lower than the maximum item level of the myth track items. So that means you can, in theory, get a higher item level weapon from your vault on myth track or from the mythic raid versus the crafted item. But how likely is it that you as a player can obtain maximum myth track weapon at the very start of M+ getting released and mythic coming out? I would say pretty low. Even for players that are mythic raiders, the chances of you getting such a high item level weapon is pretty low. So getting a really big damage boost initially from having a crafted gilded spark weapon does make a lot of sense. And also having a 2-hand weapon would make a lot of sense for you because then you get, you basically just have that extra bonus of having a strong 2-hand weapon versus having one hand with a spark and an offhand that is lower item level, right? So using 2 sparks on a 2-hand weapon and putting as a caster, your Dark Moon Ascension embellishment on it would make a lot of sense. Of course, again, depends on what class you play, what spec you play, what kind of weapons you want. But just keep that in mind. Then, if you don't want to use your sparks on your weapon because there's a different item that you want, maybe there's a trinket or anything else that you want to craft, then try to get high budget slots if you're going to use your spark and your gilded crests, right? Because at that point, you're going to have a really high item level item equipped. So instead of going for braces, which is a low budget slot, you want to go for something like a chest or legs that have a lot of stats on them to make the most out of it being a high item level item. So if you use your crests, your spark item, put it on a high budget slot at the start of the season. If you don't use your spark and you want your embellishment, put it on a low budget slot like bracers and belt to make sure that you're not losing out on too much stats for having to downgrade your item. Later on in the season, it would make sense to have the spark on a low budget item as well if you would be able to get higher item level, like maximum myth track on all of your slots otherwise. All right, so that's it about the spark. I do want to talk about the crest system now. So many crests right now. The only crests that are still limited, that we only have a seasonal cap of 90 off or 180 next week, is the Gilded Harbinger crests and the Runed Harbinger crests. So the two highest crests. Now, a lot of people have loads and loads of Carved Harbinger crests because the seasonal cap is 360 and loads of Weathered Harbinger crests. Now, a lot of people are worried to use those Harbinger crests because they have a seasonal cap. But the thing is, we have so many of them that you should not necessarily be too worried about using those crests, especially if you're a player that is going to be able to do M+ when M+ gets released. So the way I would think of this, because this is of course an individual decision, each depending on what content you can do as a player. If you can't do M+ at all because that content is too difficult for you, then you're going to have a hard time being able to get higher item level pieces, right? Therefore, maybe Carved Harbinger crests are going to be more valuable for you. If you're a Mythic Raider and you have absolutely no problem going into M+ and immediately doing +10 keys, well then Carved Harbinger crests are going to have very limited value for you, if not be kind of useless for you, because as soon as you do Mythic +10 dungeons, you don't need the Carved Harbinger crest for upgrades anymore. So the way I would look at this, if I were you, I would look at how much of the crests I have, and then I would think about what you need the gear for. This is an important question, right? Because technically speaking, you can always save your crests, because if I get an item in that slot that is higher, then at that point, I don't have to use a crest anymore, right? So for example, right now I have a 593 shoulders equipped. If I upgrade these shoulders right now, and then tomorrow I get a shoulder piece that is item level 606, then I quote unquote wasted my crests, because after I got the 606 piece, I don't need the crest anymore. But you can always think this way, right? At that point, if you always think this way, you would never spend your crests, because you can always say, oh, well, but I might get a better piece from the vault next week, right? Or I might get a better item from the raid. So is there a point in always saving your crests? No, right? Because you do want to make sure you get the upgrades. So the way I would be looking at it is, what do you want to gear a character for? Are you raiding in a guild? When is your raid day? Are you raiding on Monday, for example? Okay, if you're raiding on Monday, then maybe don't use your crests on Sunday or on Saturday, because until Monday, you still have the opportunity to get higher item level items in those slots that you have lower item levels in, from delves, from Mythic Zeros, from whatever else. And once you really need the gear, so once you're entering the raid, that's when your character should have the maximum player power, right? Because of course you want to make sure you're performing in a raid and you want to kill bosses in a raid, if that is your goal. Then I would use my crest and use my upgrades before the raid starts on Monday, right? To make sure that your character is as geared as possible for that moment. And if the content that you do previous to the raid is not that difficult or not that important to you, like for example, if you do Mythic Zeros, you don't need your character to be maximum geared. If you do delves, you might not need your character to be maximum geared as well. So if you don't need to use your crests, then save them for a moment where you actually want your character to be max player power, right? One thing to note as well is the vault. Does it make sense to save sparks, and does it make sense to save your crests for the vault? Because of course the vault is the highest item level loot we get at the moment. So does it make sense to save? I would say yes, depending on what your goal is. Again, if you're trying to kill Heroic Ansarak during Heroic Week, which is a very difficult fight, then sending your spark that week and not waiting for the vault and sending your crest does make sense. But if you don't attempt doing Heroic Ansarak with your guilds, and you mainly just want to focus on Mythic Plus, like if Mythic Plus is your end game content and you want to make sure that you're maximum geared for Mythic Plus, well then waiting and not sending your Spark during Heroic Week, waiting for the Vault, choosing your item, and then deciding what to use your Spark on, what to use your Crests on, does make sense. So always think about, okay, what do I want my character to be maximum geared for? Then maybe wait for that moment or before that moment happens, and then send your Sparks and your Crests to make sure that you're not wasting any of them. The only time where you wouldn't be wasting any of the Crests is if you easily can access gear that is higher. Like if Crests turn out to be useless for you very soon, then you might as well just use them all, right? For example, the Carved Harbinger Crests would be quote-unquote useless for you if you're gonna be doing Mythic Plus 10 keys as soon as the season properly starts, right? If you're just gonna be spamming plus 10 keys, you're gonna get such high item level that the Carved Harbinger Crests are not really going to be something that you need anymore, and therefore you can just use those Crests to get item level upgrades immediately in the moment. All right, so that's about the Crests. One more thing people were a little bit confused about, and it's basically the gear track. So your items are on a certain track: champion track, veteran track, hero track, and so on, right? So these tracks just determine how low and how high your item can go. These tracks are not actually directly related to the Crests, because some people have been asking, should I be sending Carved Harbinger Crests on veteran items, or should I be sending them on champion loot? And the answer is, it doesn't matter. The Crests are only related to the item level that it upgrades. The track itself does not make a difference. So a 610 champion item, so a 5 out of 8, would be the same as a hero 1 out of 6, right? A hero 1 out of 6 is the same item level 610 than a 5 out of 8 champion item, and they both require the same amount of Crests, the same type of Crest, and the same amount of Valor Stones to be upgraded. So whenever you're upgrading an item, or whenever you think about upgrading an item, the only thing you should really think about and care about is the actual item level of the item. The track does not matter when it comes to should you be upgrading this or not, right? So just to make sure that that people understand this, because I get asked this a lot. So again, the item track itself only determines how high the item level can go, how much you can upgrade it to, what item level, but it's not that you need more or less Crests for upgrading a champion item versus a hero item, if they are the same item level. All right. So I hope this helped you out a little bit. I know this can be incredibly frustrating and difficult, and I know that people would like to have like answers. Like people would want me to tell them, hey, just use these Crests, or just do this, or just do that. But unfortunately, it is very individual, and it really just depends what kind of content you can do with your character. It depends which kind of Crests you can farm easily. Can you even get gilded Crests at all? Because if you can't, then that's going to be obviously different decisions for you as well. So unfortunately, I can't give you like a 100% guideline on what you should be doing. I do also want to make sure that you're simming your character to know what the best upgrade would be in the moment, because you can actually sim your Crest and your Valor Stones availability. So you can import your character into raid bots. You can select the amount of Crests you have currently and how much Valor Stones you have, for example, and then it can calculate which upgrade would be the best upgrade at the moment. This would be a good tool to use right before the raid starts, or right before something starts that you're gearing for. So again, if you're raiding on Monday and you want to do Heroic Ansurek or whatever it is you want to do, then sim your character before that raid. Look what the best upgrade would be in that moment with the amount of Crests that you currently have, and then send those upgrades to have your character be as strong as possible in that moment. Same works for Sparks as well. For embellishments and for Sparks, using raid bots is going to be an incredible help. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to follow the YouTube channel if you haven't yet. Check out my stream over at twitch.tv/Naguura if you have any additional questions. And thank you so much for watching. Have a nice rest of your day, and goodbye.